it doesn't matter what you think you don't have. There's always something to pass along, and there's someone to pass along to. It's just about being a little bit more open-minded about who that might be, and also about what you have. I mean, really look at that, like, what do you have?
But it doesn't have to be anything like huge, like $1 billion. Something that's important, that it's about memories, something you're doing together.
Thriving in Tandem. It's a podcast for you, the married entrepreneur that wants to win in business and marriage at the same time.
Welcome to Thriving in Tandem.
All right, honey, let's talk about legacy. Our family legacy, business legacy. I mean, legacy, right? I mean, we've heard this term quite a bit, and I think for the average business owner, I don't know if we're thinking about legacy, building and leaving a legacy. And maybe that's in the back of our mind, but I think because of the way we perceive what legacy means, that sometimes it feels like it's too far off, it's too big of a goal to try and reach. Well, the reality is, regardless of your circumstance, that being intentional to build and leave a legacy is very important. And when you're intentional about it, then you're more likely to achieve it. And in reality is, whatever you leave behind is going to be some form of legacy, whether it's good or bad, right? Because some people's legacy is not good. Like if you look at like some of the, criminals of the past, Al Capone or Jesse James or whatever, those are negative legacies. But then there are people that have left positive, legacies, like the Rockefellers. But regardless of how intentional you are about building legacy, you're going to build one and leave one regardless. So it might as well be a good one. And you might as well be intentional about how to build it. So I think in this episode, honey, we're going to tackle kind of bringing it down. I think sometimes, like I said, that term legacy seems so big or so out of reach that we don't even try. And so I think we want to kind of break it down into a realistic, very achievable way. And I think the first thing is we need to define what legacy even is, right?
I think that's a good idea, because I think a lot of times we get stuck in the day-to-day things and we don't look that far down, or we don't want to think we're not going to be around forever, right? It's like, oh, that day will come someday, but it eventually comes, but we're not planned for it.
Yeah. So, legacy, like just for basics, money, assets, right? You want to leave something behind for your kids, for the next generation and for the generations to come. And so that's one part of legacy, is like, just the assets that you do have and what you leave behind. And then the business, you want the business to go on and thrive beyond you. And when we look at statistically, when it comes to business, only about 30% of business make it first, only about 30% of first generation business make it to the second. And so very few business, just even from a business standpoint, build legacy. And that doesn't have to happen. I think you can have a higher percentage, but regardless of the percentage, as you're listening, you can build a long-lasting legacy for your kids and the generations to come. So let's tackle this, okay?
Yes, because you definitely want to leave a good legacy, but you have to kind of plan it out some, because it doesn't just happen on its own.
So let's start with defining what legacy even is. I mean, we kind of started to tickle it a little bit, right? And so what is legacy? I'm asking you, honey.
Oh, I thought you were asking our audience.
Well, I am, but I'm also asking you, when you hear the term legacy, I mean, what do you think about?
I think it's something that you want somebody else to carry on to the next generations to come.
And that's the practical side, or what that's true. But what about as far as, does a monetary amount come to mind? Is it certain types of assets, or, what are you leaving behind? Like when you're thinking about legacy, do you think about the actual physical assets that you're leaving behind, or is it just strictly that you want to make sure someone continues whatever you started?
I want to make sure they continue whatever I started, and leaving assets to them as well, but I need to let them know what it meant to me, or how I did things, and what it means to me, so that they are able to pass that down to the next generation and bring it to fruition.
Yeah. So simply, legacy is you want your memories basically to be passed on. And obviously you want those to be positive. And a lot of times those memories are passed down. Sometimes it's just stories,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times it's physical assets, whether it's a home, other property. We talked about business, just the number, the other assets that you could potentially pass along, memorabilia's, right? There's physical things, there's physical assets that can be passed down legacy, but there's also just the memories. But then
Mm-hmm.
even the memories and assets can obviously usually tied together, right? And
Right, and
so,
it could be even sorry, and it could be even recipes that you used to cook with grandma or baking. You got the Italian grandma that you used to bake and cook with, and all her recipes are in her head. So you need someone to write those down or to pass them on to the next generation because you don't want to say like, "Oh my gosh, she made the best bolognese spaghetti," but no one knew how to make it.
yeah, so let's start with something like that because, again, as we started the show, legacy, sometimes we're thinking it has to be this huge thing that's got to be, multi-million dollar assets and stuff that you pass along. But let's start just with the memories themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And too many times, one generation, a lot of memories and a lot of thoughts and ideas and recipes get lost generation to generation because we're not we don't tend to be very intentional about making sure some of these things live on beyond us. And so think about just for yourself, not just about your, like monetary assets, things that have something of tangible value, but just think about the memories, the stories, recipes, those kind of things. Start thinking about how do we be intentional about, making sure these things move on to the next generation. Who are we going to leave these things behind to? Because otherwise, sometimes things just kind of disappear.
Mm-hmm. And I also, when you say that, it brings to mind like pictures. Go through the pictures, the old pictures, put people's names on them, how they're related to you. Because once that generation passes away, that the pictures are of them or their family, no one's going to know who they are anymore. And the stories, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
so many great stories. I remember somebody said they were getting their grandpa, maybe it was great grandpa, to write a book so that they could have all the great family stories. And I love that idea because then you could pass it down to the generations to come and it's all captured.
Yeah, unfortunately, in my family, we don't have much memories to pass along. We do have some photo albums, but it only goes back to my grandparents on
Mm-hmm.
both sides. And then we don't even know who they were. Like when my parents passed, they unfortunately passed, a month apart. But as my sister and I were going through the photo albums, as you recall, honey, that we're like, who are these people? So, I mean, it's sad. It's sad to say, but my parents weren't very intentional about sitting down and telling you who's who, which aunts and uncles, and some people were kind of like not necessarily blood related, but they're related, and how do they fit in the family? What are some of those stories when you're looking at grandparents and great grandparents? What happened to cause them to leave Japan to come to Hawaii? There's so many stories that we don't know. And then, I remember when we're at a memorial for my parents when we were in Hawaii, and, we're sitting in the hotel lobby with my cousin and, one of the uncles, and, everybody's trying to piecemeal stories
Mm-hmm.
together, right? We didn't have the full story of, the Fukuis. And that's kind of sad. And that's because they weren't intentional. And it's not just my parents, but even my grandparents and all that. They weren't very intentional about how do we document some of these things and pass down the stories. I mean, even verbally,
Mm-hmm.
because we didn't have any verbal stories hardly, and so things like that I think is so important because for me looking back, I'm like, wow, that's sad. We our culture goes back obviously into Japan, and I don't know anybody past Hawaii, right? I
Mm-hmm.
don't only know my parents and grandparents, and they're in Hawaii, but as far as the generations before when they're in Japan. And we've heard, some stories that on my mom's side, they're, from samurai descent and that kind of stuff. But we don't have the full story. That's about all I know. Right. And so that's sad. And so being intentional about just that kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
those memories, that's part of legacy that is important to pass along because the generations, forward are going to want to know.
Right. And you're never too young to do it because my mom passed away. She was just turned 50 and I was in my young 20s. And so There's a lot of stories that I don't know. I didn't have all those years to ask all the questions about our childhood and our family as well. And I know my dad doesn't like to talk about his childhood at all.
Yeah.
So I don't have that much background history on our families.
Yeah. And one of my friends in my mastermind group, Jeanette, she was telling the group the other week that she's going back to China in a little bit, in a month or two, I think, and to visit her grandfather, who's up in age and probably not doing well. And she was talking about how, I mean, she really wants to know the stories.
Mm-hmm.
She really wants to know the stories, and she wanted to take the time to be very intentional. Because she started to realize, as everybody's getting older, is like, hey, we don't have a lot of time here, and I need to go talk to him. I need to, try to grab the stories. And so, we got a bunch of marketers on the call, and everybody's like, take a video camera and record it.
I was going to say the
Talk
same
to him
thing.
and record it. And she's like, looked at us, and we're like, I don't know, a few of us are chiming in. I was like, yes, you got to record it. I mean, even if it's your camera, but be intentional about this and asking the stories and asking the questions. And she lit up. And then one of our guys is a kind of a big YouTube influencer, and he's like, hey, let's get on the call. I'll set you up, find the right camera equipment that's not going to be cumbersome, because she's going to China, so she can't carry too much. But he kind of just told her what equipment to purchase that's not too cumbersome and bulky, but yet is going to give her a quality output. And anyways, that was pretty fun. And then the call last week, she was lit up. She's like, yeah, I got on the call with Kevin, and he helped me find the right equipment, and she's all pumped up. She's all kind of has an idea of what she wants to do, and then she's like, but I haven't told my grandpa yet, and I don't know how he's going to react. And we're like, oh, don't worry, he won't care.
Don't tell him ahead of time.
just treat him like a celebrity, and he'll be all over it. But anyways,
but I love that idea, because I was thinking, when you said that, I was thinking audio, but video is even better, because then you can see him, and he's telling the stories right in front of your eyes. I love it.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just an example of how you can start to be intentional, because maybe you're just like Jeanette, or even like myself, where you'd love to know more a little bit about our culture, our background, the past, and maybe you're like our family that really didn't want to talk about it. And so now's the time to start to prod in a nice way, right? Because you want to know, and be intentional about that. So you have also your story and your family to build upon that legacy, and then you can pass it on to your kids, right? And so it's never too early to start thinking about legacy. In fact, especially what we're talking about right now, just getting the stories from the past, now's the right time to do it, because you don't know how much time you have,
right? Especially
when you're talking about your parents and grandparents. So what about, on the flip side, about if you feel like you're too old to build anything, your parents, grandparents are gone, and you don't have a whole lot of assets or whatever, and you feel like, hey, maybe I'm just too old, I really don't have anything to pass along, whether it's your business or whatever. And I guess I would say, I don't know what you have to say about this, honey, but I would say it doesn't matter what you think you don't have. There's always something to pass along. And even if you're like us, we don't have kids, you may not have kids, but there's always something to pass along, and there's someone to pass along to. It's just about being a little bit more open-minded about who that might be, and also about what you have. I mean, really look at that, like, what do you have? Right? Would you just want to say something?
Well, I think it's easy to discount and look at the negative. Oh, I don't have anything. But it doesn't have to be anything like huge, like $1 billion. It could be just, like I said, the recipes, you know what I mean? Like, I'm leaving you, I wrote these recipes for you, or I made videos, or let's do it together. Something that's important, that it's about memories, something you're doing together. Maybe there was something on your bucket list you always wanted to do. Leave a legacy with one of your grandkids. Go do it with them. Yeah. Take pictures of it.
And even if you talk about your business and you say, oh, no one's going to want to take it over, and it's really nothing, nothing worthwhile handing over. Well, I'd say I would challenge that. Number one, I said, until you have actually closed up the business or sold it or whatever, you have an opportunity to still build it in a way that somebody wants to continue to take it over. And in fact, if you're talking about kids or even grandkids, is like even start to bring them into the conversation about, I'd really like to, finish strong with
Mm-hmm.
the business. And what do you think? Even get some thoughts and ideas from your family, and getting people to come in and be part of the solution of how to take this business, no matter what situation it's in, to take it to the next level in a way that somebody else will want to take it over.
Well, and I think start with the conversation, because a lot of times I hear people say, well, nobody ever asked me if I wanted it. They were a family member. My dad never, when I was working in the business, he always said I would take it over. I ended up getting married and moving away, but he never asked me when he wanted to retire if I wanted it. And
Yeah.
he didn't ask my other sister as well, or my brother. So sometimes it's just asking, and the sooner is better than later to see if they're even interested, because sometimes they might be. And then you can bring them on into the business and show them how it works, teach them all the ropes and the different things, and see what they're good at. Because sometimes once you start working in the business, you'll find different aspects. Oh my gosh, I really love this. And I didn't expect that at all. I didn't see that coming. And sometimes it's just nice working with a family member. It's kind of comforting and nourishing. Like, oh yeah, I'm working with my grandpa. People get a kick out of that.
Yeah, I would say, add to that is, don't assume that your kids or someone doesn't want to take it over at some point. I think a lot of times we have assumptions on it because of maybe your kids are, have another career, or maybe they started another business. Maybe they even said in the past, I don't want to be part of the business. Maybe, like, I don't want to work in the business or whatever. Maybe they've said negative things in the past, but it doesn't mean that the door is shut
Mm-hmm.
for them to want to take over at some point. It's just opening up the conversation. And we've shared in a previous episode how, one of our clients, early on when I first started working with her, she has this accounting agency pretty close by. And when I first started working with her, I did ask about succession. Do you think one of your kids or both may want to take it over at one point? And, I knew they're young. One was in college, one was in high school. But, like I said, there's never too early to start the conversation. And her response was, I don't think any of them want it. They don't show any interest, and number of excuses and all that. And so I asked her, I said, well, why don't you think they want it? Have you had a conversation with them? And she said, no, not a formal conversation, but she said they made some negative comments about the business in the past. So I asked her, what did you, tell me when you were building the business? I mean, what was going on? I mean, were you working a lot of hours, and, how was work-life balance with the kids and all that? Because, she was divorced at the time, and she was saying basically like a lot of business owners, where she was working a lot of hours and she didn't have a lot of time for the kids when they're growing up. And so I said, well, my suspicion is that the business itself it's not that they don't like the business itself. It's, I think, they don't like the fact that the business was the border, or the kind of the wall between their relationship with you, right? And so it can be repaired, but it's going to take time. It's not going to be overnight. But one of the ways to start the conversation um, about not so much succession per se, but to start to bring them back into the business is start to ask them, what would you do different in the business? Like, do you see anything in the business, even when we're growing it, that you might have done differently? You see any gaps that need to be fixed? Those kind of things. Especially the daughter was, already in college at the time, so it's old enough where I said, I bet you they have some ideas and thoughts about what they would fix. Because I think, when we're younger, we look at our own parents and we'll say, when I get older, I'm not going to do it this way. Right. And it's not talking specifically about business, but just life in general. Right. I wouldn't do it this way. I'm not going to do it this way. Right. And so I know they'll have some kind of answer. And so anyways, fast forward some years later, right, when we were at her anniversary party for the business, that she introduced her kids, both kids, and she brought them up on stage and said, proudly, like, they're both working in the business.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Remember that? And I'm like, and I kind of knew that, because we obviously still work with her. And so I knew both both of the kids were starting to work in the business, but it didn't hit me until she introduced them.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, I remember that conversation. And so all that to say, it's a long story, but because you may be one of those situations where you think the kids don't want to be part of it because maybe they've said something in the past. But that's the past. It doesn't mean moving forward that they don't want to be part of the business. Maybe there's just some adjustment and some conversation you need to have to clear the air, bring them in as part of the solution, and start the conversation of how can you start eventually take over and how do we build this business in such a way that you're going to want to take it over,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So it's never too early to start the communication process with them because maybe they'll take it over. I know, like myself, uh, my dad wanted somebody, a clone just like him. And I needed more room to be creative when I was working there. So sometimes it's just having those conversations of what that's going to look like. And because it's going to pass down from generation to generation, it's going to change some because we all
Yeah.
have different strengths and weaknesses. And
Yeah, and again, if you're kind of thinking negative about you don't really have anything to pass on, that's not true. You have something, right? And even with this business, it may not be in the situation that you would like, but you can start working it,
mm-hmm.
right? And you can start to set the stage for someone to take over and then build it better than you have, because ultimately, it's not about. I know you may have an idea of where you want the business to be at this point, and you haven't reached that, so you feel like you're a failure, or it's not as good, whatever. But that's okay. You can allow the next generation to take it to the level that you envisioned. In fact, when you think about these multi-generational businesses, how they are now definitely wasn't how it was when it went for the first and second generation. So you started and set the pace, set the foundation for then the next generation to take it forward. And then generation after that will take it forward again. Right. So don't be discouraged about where your business is at the moment or just your own personal assets, but just set the stage and prepare the next generation to move it forward and build it even better.
Because your legacy is probably going to have some great ideas on how you can grow your business. It could be the things you haven't even thought about yourself that will help move things forward and grow it.
Yeah. And so, I mean, for us, it's not like we were planning on, building legacy early on. We've been married 17 years, going on 18. And so it's not like we talked about this, right? Well, we want to build a legacy. So we totally understand that this probably isn't a typical conversation that most couples have, but we did at least set the stage. We're always in the mindset of growth. Number one was even, as I got into college, I just didn't want the same life that my parents did. And so I wanted to see, how can I have a better life, as far as financially. And then you start planning for the future, start doing little things as far as, starting my own first retirement account, 401k, investing into 401k. And then, as we shared in the previous episode about, the way we invested, the way we built wealth, kind of did things in 5-year increments in a sense. That wasn't necessarily the plan, but that's just kind of how it played out. Was roughly every 5 years we made another significant investment. And so all that to say is we've always been in a mindset of just making improvements, moving forward in our life, in our assets and all that. And now as we got to, even what, 10, 8, 6, 7, 6, 7, 8, about 8 years ago, maybe a little longer, where we, did our trust, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our living trust. And I mean, I had one before I met Kaylee, but of course things changed. We're married now. And so we had to redo the trust or redo my trust to make it our trust. That was that first step, foremost step to legacy, to start thinking about the future and what are you going to do with the assets when you're gone? Who's going to have it? How do you divvy it up? And even what are some of the things that you want to put in the trust, some directives for the next generation?
And that was a hard conversation. I don't know if the conversation was hard, but putting it into place was hard because there's no like one size fits all for solutions. And it means you need to talk about things. And we also thought in the end, after we did the trust, there's not going to be no perfect scenario. We're just going to do our best and get the trust done, and we can always update it later. It's better than having nothing at all,
Yeah.
and then it goes to probate. Nobody knows what's going on, and then it's a hot mess for
Yeah.
whoever you leave it behind
I
for.
mean, just that in itself is how do you set the stage to leave a positive legacy? And part of it, the trust itself, is prevents a lot of the um, really sad stories that we've heard, and
Mm-hmm.
we've heard so many sad
Oh my
stories, even
gosh.
recently over Thanksgiving. I mean, just sad stories of how the spouse didn't leave a will or trust or whatever, and the surviving wife it was just a hot
She
mess
didn't even get a car. They didn't even have a car in her
in her
name
name.
or in
Yeah,
both of their names. Everything was in his
his
name.
name.
And when he passed away, his brother, which he wasn't even in contact or close with,
Brother and sister.
came in and took half of everything. She didn't even get a car, you guys. It's ridiculous. It's so, so sad.
Yeah, and then she had to sell the house and then
Mm-hmm.
split the profits to the brother and sister. And so just something as simple as that. How do you want to make sure that the next generation um, doesn't have to suffer for with these kind of issues? And then, but the trust itself is like that, setting a stage for legacy, because like I said, the trust, it's not just about leaving assets and who to leave it to, but in the trust, I mean, you can do anything you
Mm-hmm.
want. I mean, basically you're leaving directions for the next generation. It's not about who gets money and who gets the assets, but you can also leave directions for the next generation. So, for example, we don't have kids, but we have nieces and nephews that we're leaving a portion of our assets are going to be left to our niece and nephews, and the other portion is going to be kind of put into some kind of foundation to be gifted over time to different nonprofits that we choose. Right. With the with the niece and nephews, one of our concerns was that we didn't want them to just spend it and waste inheritance, right? And I remember, honey, your concern, a big concern was that because they're not our kids, we don't have control over them. We can't teach them. I mean, like if they were our kids, train them to be good with money, how to invest and all that. And, we didn't have that kind of that degree of influence per se. I mean, we can talk to them, but it's not the same. But you're worried about them spending it or wasting it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody. We knew there's a few that are definitely going to be good with money, but you never know as they get
Money can
older.
harm people if they're not in a good place emotionally,
Yeah.
physically. It can really hurt somebody big time.
So, we had this conversation. I think that was the tough part of the conversation when we're doing this, is about trusting the next generation to be good with the money. And so I said, well, honey, we can make any kind of stipulations that we want. We don't have to just give them the
Mm-hmm.
money. How about, the first thing was, how about we only give them a certain percentage of their inheritance every 5 years? There's the 5-year number again. But I said, so let's say, for example, we kind of divvy up the assets, because it wasn't all money, because you got real estate and different things. And so, but anyways, you say, okay, let's just say there are 4 nieces and nephews. There's actually more, but let's say there's 4 nieces and nephews. and so the inheritance, their portion of the inheritance that go to them, are split up, in quarters, but their share of the inheritance, they can only access, like say 5% of, 5% of their portion of inheritance every 5 years, with the thinking that, especially when the money's still invested, that it can continue to grow.
Mm-hmm.
That that's an inheritance that continue to grow. So they don't pull everything out. They only pull a portion out, and the remainder can still grow. Right. And then so, but one of the stipulations was that they have to be outside their home. They have to be debt free. And if they're in debt, that their portion of the inheritance gets redistributed to the other niece and nephews that are debt free. Right. So
not permanently for that. What was
that round
for the
for that round. So they still, remember, they're only accessing at 5%. They relinquish that if they're in debt, but then the next 5 years after that,
they have
get
5 years to get out.
They get a chance, yeah, and they get a chance to get their share of the inheritance at that point, right? So they have a chance, right? They have another chance, and they can keep having other chances, and hopefully they learn. But that's a way, right? That was one way for us to at least say, okay, it's one way to train them in a way, right? Even with us being gone, it was a way for us to be able to train them to be good with their money. And so they know that even though, they lost their inheritance of that portion for that period, they know in 5 years they can get their financial house in order and will get access to the inheritance later. Right. And so, that's just the short of it, as we wrap up, about how this is pretty simple, right? It's not like we're talking about even leaving a business. We haven't really got to that about how do you really prepare for succession. We kind of talked about a little bit, but the trust or leaving, as far as ensuring legacy, a lot of it is just documentation and direction for the next generation, whether it's your business or your inheritance or whatever. How do you make sure you prepare the next generation to carry on?
And I want to say too, like if there's something specific that you want to go to that person, give it to them before you pass away.
Yeah.
Or put it in a will, because how many times has that not gotten to that person because nothing was in writing?
Yeah. So, well, this went faster than I thought it was going to go. And we kind of started a little bit different direction than I envisioned, but I don't know.
Well, you never know with me where we're going to go.
I thought it went pretty well, right? I think what was great about this episode is we started simple, right? It wasn't, legacy doesn't have to be this huge multi-million-dollar, asset or net worth, but it can be just as simple as recipes and memories, all the way to whatever you do have. Let's make sure we leave some direction for the next generation, and not when you die. Hopefully you prepare them ahead of time, especially with your business. You definitely want to get them involved early on. But I don't know. I thought this was a pretty good episode. What do you think, honey?
Yes, it went great.
You're just saying that. That sounded so convincing. Okay.
Honey, I'm smacking him, you guys, because he's always laughing at me.
Well, it sounded so, yeah, great. Yeah. Okay. All right. No, good.
You want me to say it more monotone? Yeah.
No, I don't. I want you to sound more excited.
It went fabulous, you guys.
So, thanks for listening in. And I know this was beneficial for you because you're still listening. So go ahead. We'd love for you to go ahead and share this to another married entrepreneur who needs to hear this. And while you're on, go ahead and leave us a review too. It's preferably a good one.
That would be fabulous, you guys. I'm so excited for that.
So thanks for listening to Thriving in Tandem, and God bless, and we'll talk to you next week. Thank you for listening to the Thriving in Tandem podcast. Please visit our website, marriedentrepreneur.co, for a variety of free resources to help your marriage and business succeed.
And feel free to leave us a review and share this episode with another married entrepreneur. That would mean so much to us.
See you next week.